Hello guys and welcome back. So we ended up creating the polywire source for our debris, and we want to generate a normalized lifespan. And the way I'm going to do that is, let me remove this. We have these guys, we have these points, and I'm going to use a trail node. I'll explain why in a second. I'm going to trail them 150 frames. Let's say the animation stops here. I'm going to create a 150 frame copies at the end frame, and let me put down a time shift here and delete it. I want to be always at this frame independent from the timeline, and this actually represents the path for all these points. Okay, and what we can do is we can use an add node and create a primitive between all these points. And the primitive attribute that we want to use is the name attribute, because this represents a piece. Each one of these points represents an actual RBD geometry, RBD piece, and this represents its path. So now we've connected all the points of this path. We can actually lower this. Let's increase it to 2, and let's set this to 75. And that should give us less point. Let me verify something quickly. So I'm going to use you can see here it's generating, it's not connecting the points correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, yeah, let's add an add node there. I think this is fine, and let's resample them. Sorry. The reason it's not working, the reason it's doing this is because if I middle click, it's actually copying the packed primitive, and what we need to do is we need to delete everything except the centroid. I'm going to do that using an add node. So I'm going to add node delete geometry but key points, and that will only remove, I will remove everything except the points, and that's what we need. Now if we connect them, we get the result that we need. We don't need the resample, in fact. At this point, we'll need it later. Cool, so now we have the path of all of them. Let's do that trick with the texture. Cool, and so we're computing the UV coordinate, copying that into an attribute. Let's call this life. And then let's visualize that. So now we can flip this, and let's say we want the objects to emit in this area only. Okay, if we want specific control, we can isolate the curves and tweak their path independently, but for now I'm just going to use the same value across the board. And right now each one, even if we use, let's say, 50% of their lifespan, this guy will stop here, this guy will stop here, this guy will stop here, and each one of them is relative to its emission. Cool, so now the trick is how we're going to copy this information to these guys. Okay, well, let's see. What we have is we have the position of these points, and we also know that these guys have been deformed using a centroid. So we can take this centroid information and copy it and store it into an attribute. So let's call this v centroid equal v at p. So what I've done is I took these points and copied their position, point position, into a centroid attribute. Okay. Now these points are going to inherit that. Well, I need to tell it to do that. So I'm going to take on copy template attribute, and we want to inherit the centroid attribute that we just made. Cool. So what this means is we can, at any point in time, we can move them to their centroid position. We can take all these guys and move them to their centroid. Let's do that. I'm going to create a point pop just to illustrate this. I'm going to bind, import the centroid, which is a vector, and let's mix between the current position and the centroid position. Okay, that's the original position, that's their centroid position. Cool. So what we can do then is here, or yeah, here is fine. We can create an attribute wrangle and move all these points to their centroid position. So I'm going to v.p equal v at centroid. I'm just going to override the position temporarily. And now they're much closer to this guy. Okay, they're somewhere on the path that their centroid was traveling at. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to resample all these guys. Actually, let's do it here. So I'm going to resample them so we have more points, and then we're going to attribute transfer that life from here into these points. Okay, so let's transfer that. And we should have the life attribute now. Cool, it's there. Perfect. So each time these curves are going to progress, they're going to inherit that life, and we can actually preview it. So let me copy this over here. You can see it's changing, and if I go all the way to the end, they're completely black. If we go to the beginning, they're white. But now we've lost that information. We've lost their original position, and we can't convert them anymore to an actual volume, because it's just one point. So what we need to do is we need to store the position before we change them, do the attribute transfer, and then restore the position. So I'm going to copy this, and then we're going to restore the position from rest, because this creates a copy of the point position and stores it in a rest attribute. So now we're restoring them, we do the copy, and there we go. We have our points. Next, we're going to, instead of using that, we're going to use this as the polywire source, and then in the VDB from polygon, we're going to actually add, let's call this length, and we're going to add the new one, the new guy, which is called life. So let's create a new field, life. Let's hide them, and let's use that also as a multiplier. So I'm going to import that. I'm going to use it as a multiplier, and it should fade off. So if we hit play and scrub through, it's going to fade towards the end. And now we have a perfect image, and look at that guy is still emitting, which we can control if we want to. But we have all the controls that we need now. We have a linear fall off for the source. We have an emission from behind the object, and we have a linearized path so they don't emit forever. Let me template the deforming geometry, which is this guy. Actually, it's this guy. Yeah, and you can see it's working really well. And this is going to, you don't need to substep anything now. It's going to work perfectly with your source, and it's going to fade away correctly. Cool. I hope you guys find this useful, and let's continue to the next tips and tricks. Thanks, guys.